Okay, hello everybody who's on the webinar. We will talk about how do we build our applications using the Oracle way, and we will specifically talk about Graal Cloud Native. So we will talk about what it is, how do you build microservices and applications using GCN or Graal Cloud Native. In this particular example session, we'll talk about connecting to an Oracle database using GCN, and then what I will actually show you is how to build a very a simple app, a UX using React and using the Micronaut to connect to the database. So that's me. So what is Graal Cloud Native? Basically, it's an initiative and a package that's in the making, and it is put together to improve developer productivity. That's the first and the most fundamental aspect of GCN. We have also a website. You can go there and spend hours and learning all about Micron Framework, about GraalVM, and about many other exciting technologies that are in this space. So it's all about improving developer productivity, and we also make it very, very easy to basically leverage Oracle Cloud Services. And so we also have demo codes up on GitHub to know how to do these things. And once you do that, we build on top of GraalVM, which makes it really, really easy for applications to start early, very fast, and also takes less memory. And finally, we are multi-cloud by design. So once you build an application using Oracle, you can deploy it on any of the supported clouds, including AWS, GCP, and Azure. So what's in GCN itself? Well, it is the building block is GraalVM, the JVM or the JDK that Oracle Lab ships out, and it's part when you get yourself an Oracle VM. On the Oracle Cloud, of course, you get GraalVM by default, and you can also use it. You can also get it in through other means, including the JDK. So the other building block is the Micron Framework. Comes from Micronaut Foundation and the object computing folks, and there are it's a community effort, great open source project. We support it from the Oracle side as well. And finally, we have the GraalVM tools for Java extension, which is you can download from Visual Studio, VS Code website, download it, and then that sets a developer's laptop up or desktop up, so we can build applications using Java and using VS Code and using my framework and leveraging GraalVM, and finally deploying it onto the clouds. There is a package that will be coming from GCN. We call it Graal Cloud Native package, and it's basically a convenience. It puts it together, all the things I just talked about, so it's easy for developers to get going. So in this session, what Burt and I will be talking a lot about is how we basically, this is more of a hands-on session. So we'll be talking about how do we take the different pieces and build an application together. So there are a bunch of prerequisites, I'm going to assume, but it's in the PowerPoint here. Also will be available to you, so you can download all the right bits onto your desktop. So what I will be doing here is basically having a React-based user experience, a UX web app, basically connect to a microservice which I have built using Micronaut, and which in turn connects to the Oracle database. And so this is the end-to-end scenario, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to get it done. So I'm going to get out of the PowerPoint for a moment and show you this is the website that I was talking about. So we have a Graal Cloud Native website. You can go there and learn more about this space. Second of all, let's go here for a moment. There is a guide actually written by Burt a while ago. Let's try this over here. So there's a guide that has been created by Burt on how to access Oracle Autonomous Database using Micronaut. I recommend. We're not going to do this part interactively. So basically, you go create yourself an autonomous database, and you set up credentials, and finally you basically go create a user. In this case, here's the script you will execute. In this my demo, all I've done is change the name from Micronaut demo to GCN user. It's easy for me to map to my brain, and the rest is fairly simple. So I'm going to assume that it has been done by you. And so if I go to OCI console, you can see that I have created a database. And then if you click on the database action, I come over here, and this is now the database is all set up. Now the first thing I'm going to do, because I've run this before, I'm going to clean up. So I'm going to drop all the objects I've created ahead of time. And you will also find it very useful to have this around, because we all constantly build and test apps and change the schema, what have you. And so it's easy to have this little thing handy around. So once I've done that, I will go over here, and I will. First thing you need to do is need to create a .oci config file you will set up. In this is what I've set up already. So this is the database I created ahead of time. The rest you can download from OCI console. It's a fairly easy thing to do. Of course, I'm running on my Windows machine, as you can tell from here. Once you have done that, the next thing I have to tell Micronaut, like, hey, here's my database. I have some I have a username and password. Clearly, I shouldn't be sharing this if it was a commercial product, but it's not. Thank God, it's a demo. So I set up an application specific to Oracle Cloud, and I set it up using the YAML file. And now, I say, hey, please pick up the rest of the items are in the lab section of config, as I showed to you over here. So that is all set up. And then what I need to do is go set up the schema the way I want it. So the default guide that comes, it basically has different things like users. So I wanted to extend it. So I set up a new table, new parameters, and basically column values. Be very careful. The reason I'm showing it to you today is it's very easy to make a mistake. Uppercasing, lowercasing matters. The exact syntax matters. And so this is where, having a script which basically constantly drops and the tables is a very handy thing to go do. So once you have done that, then basically we are set up. Now I'm not showing you that I've also downloaded Oracle's database extension, which allows me to connect to the database in this case. And in this case, you can see I have nothing set up because I've dropped all the tables. Okay. So I'm going to go over here and clean up. Now run the Micronaut-based microservice on my desktop, which is in turn is connecting to Oracle database. If all goes well, you should see success over here, and now it'll run. So because it's the first time and I just dropped the table before, and I have to say, hey, by default, set it up. And therefore the schema gets created. If I come over here and refresh that, you will see that sure enough, the schema got created according the way I wanted it. So once that is done, then what I'm going to do is switch over the mode, and I want to do a very simple curl first, make sure that it's working end-to-end. Sure it is. Also for my own sanity, for simplicity, I usually write up a simple web file, a web page basically, so I can tell like, oh, yep, sure, it's working. And then I can, since we're here, let's actually also create search. Execute search. This is my very cheesy little test program, by the way, as you can tell. Let's also add user. 3. The person here. If I do a get all, you can see that Alok got added, and now I can do a search. This is there. If I do a get all, it's all there. So what I'm going to finally demo is that I'm just going to do a delete. If I do get all, sure enough, got deleted, right? So then what I've also done is I have downloaded Material UI code, and I've hacked it together enough that I will come back to these things in a bit more detail, but I want to show you the end result. So here you go. I have a little React-based app. I can do a search here. If this was like a lot of files, then a lot of rows, then I can quickly do a search. I can also add a row. So I will add a row here, and so you can see it's there. I can come over here, and if I'm going to just refresh this so that it's clean. And sure enough, I get here, and finally I can come over here and do another curl, and sure enough, it's also here. So let's double click onto details. Okay. So I showed you that setting it up. The core work is in the controller. Okay. So the core work, there are defaults that come. For example, when you start with the original guide, it comes with a basic get. And so once you have that in place, then you know that just extend it. In this case, what I've done, I just created another object called root. I just made that up. So then I put the users inside of that, and it's easy to then parse it on the React side. So again, you don't have to do it this way. The key is to then go on and begin to create the methods to deal with the rest of the REST APIs. And in this case, I want to do by first name, last name, first name, and then later on to the last name. Look how easy it is to basically create these things. Now notice the actual call is about 1 line long. The rest is just dealing with the error codes if they, or other options, right? Same thing. If I want to do an add, I can also do more basically accept a JSON payload, and finally for put, and then finally update, and I can also handle deletes. Deletes are an easy thing to do, very easy to just two statements basically I'm able to delete the object. Nowhere did you see me type any SQL command. So that's the power of Micronaut Framework. Working through Flyway and it going directly into the database and doing CRUD operations for me, right? So then if we hop over to the web page as to what I did over there. So here, this is the URL I'm searching for. I get a bunch of data from the web page. And then finally, I make an async call. The async call looks fairly similar to what you might be used to. It's a very simple async call that we do. From here, I can basically take the payload from the web page, take the input parameters, and make a call to Micronaut-based REST API, which in turn calls the database and makes the right call, and the results come back, right? So then, and then if I go hop over to the Material UI. It's a very simple thing, a similar way. So, you know, if when you saw me add a new user, basically I'm adding and validating it. And then when it's done, then I'm basically making right here is the call where you're making the asynchronous RESTful API call, right? And there, again, in this case, React app is actually reaching out to Micronaut service, which in turn calls database. So that's the end result of that action that is happening. Fairly easy to do. I was able to hack it together in a couple of days. I had to get some help from Burt, but that's why we are doing these sessions with you. So hopefully it's easier and easier to do. Now, just to click on the user's object, user object, again, you're used to POCOs. And so this is a classic, user object I have set up. Similarly, root object I mentioned to you before. It's just a way for me to hold the user object and return something else besides the user object back to the web app. Just to test out, like, yep, it's easy to extend it. I think that's the core of what I wanted to show you. Most of this code, by the way, will come to you if you, meaning you don't have to type up everything. If you follow Burt's guide here, or you can download it. There's a link here at the very top. You can download it, and all of a sudden you have the basic shell, if you will, and then the rest is just some few pieces that I added over time. With that, we'll see if there are any questions that we can answer. Let's see. I'll click here. Burt, feel free to chime in. Do people get to ask questions verbally or vocally?
We are taking questions in the chat and Q&A panel. So both those options are available.
Okay.
One thing that might be interesting is maybe take a look at one of the repository interfaces to show how you didn't have to write any SQL or use Hibernate or anything, that a Micronaut, given just a simple interface, and this is similar to what you might be used to if you've used Spring Data. Yeah. It just implements the interface for you at compile time. Yeah. You can specify custom queries, but a lot of the time you can get by with dynamic finders and just generic CRUD operations.
Yeah. So again, these are all generated ahead of time. It's fairly easy. The part I'm not demoing to you, I highly recommend everybody to do, is download VS extension and everything else I mentioned, and then you can basically do a shift and control command palette, and you basically want to invoke a way to generate the Micronaut application right here, and then the rest gets generated. So that's a fairly easy way to get yourself a basic Micronaut app, and this is one of those things that will pop up, and now you can just run it. So Hello World is probably like 30 seconds away for you to create. And then if you want to add more database connectivity, then you can also go to the Micronaut.io launcher, and from there you can also create a project and use that as a starting point as well. Fairly easy way for a developer to basically use VS Code, Micronaut Framework, use GraalVM. By the way, I'm not showing you compiling into GraalVM right now. It takes long on my desktop. So you can use GraalVM and then connect to build your Micronaut, debug it, and connect, in this case, to database. You can, of course, talk to have your application communicate with any number of OCI services. And of course, because it's Micronaut is the basic framework, it will, the same app with a little bit of a modification will work with other services as well. So one of the examples here, for example, here you have C. I am using, of course, OCI as a cloud, but you can use AWS or Azure or GCP. Anything else you wanted to add here, Burt?
No, I don't think so. I would stress that, like a lot of the web frameworks that are out there, the framework does a tremendous amount of work for you. So, we're not using Hibernate here. We're using Micronaut data. It's all built at compile time, and it's similar to JPA. And you can use JPA and Hibernate in Micronaut if you like, but that's a much heavier weight solution. But if you really just want a really intuitive, relatively lightweight wrapper around JDBC and SQL, Micronaut data gets you a huge amount of the way there. And you don't have to pick one or the other. You can use Micronaut data for some of your repositories and some of your tables, and use Hibernate or JPA for the other stuff, and use raw SQL if you're feeling kind of wild. I mean, I could talk all day about how awesome Micronaut is. It does so much of the work for you. And we also have really nice integration with Oracle Cloud. So for example, it's, one of the things if you've used Autonomous Database in the past, one step that is, it's a little bit of work, but it's not terrible. You have to download a wallet and then, configure that. We recently added automatic wallet download to Micronaut. So you set an encryption password and it'll just do everything magically for you right behind that scene. So you can really connect easily. And of course, Alok is showing a really cool feature. I don't think he highlighted how cool this is, that recently, we've got a bunch of folks who are working at Oracle on the on GraalVM tooling and Micronaut tooling for VS Code, and that being able to connect to an autonomous database right from inside VS Code is really, really cool. I haven't actually seen it yet, so that was the first time I'd seen that, and I can't wait to try it, because the alternative is you've got to start up some sort of a database tool and then connect and figure out all the settings and all that stuff, and it's not terribly difficult, and if you've done it once you can do it again, but having it just automatically work for you is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's right. Sure. Let me share part of the screen. So here, I didn't even leave VS Code, and I connected to the database in this question, and I connected to my table, users table, and I just queried the data and look at all this data that exists. So we have basically made VS Code as the center of a developer's universe. Behind the covers, of course, you're doing all the work with Oracle Cloud, but look, you are in control of everything. And there are more and more integration features coming with database and other cloud services. Okay. So if there are no other questions, I suggest we wrap up. Sorry, I thought it would be a longer session, but the demo ran really fast. Thank you, Sergio. And we'll make sure to make all these things be available to all the Pi Day attendees, I'm pretty sure.
And maybe I'll just give another plug for, in addition to this guide, which I think is pretty cool, even though I wrote it. But obviously I got a lot of input from other folks. We've got, I think, 72 or some huge number, 71 guides out there. And obviously they're not all, Oracle based, but everything's Micronaut based. We've recently been adding lots more Oracle content, but we've got all kinds of different guides for all sorts of features in Micronaut, from the very basic stuff, creating your first Micronaut app, creating your first Micronaut app with GraalVM, building a native image from it, all the way up to distributed tracing and security and different variants on data access, and the pattern is the same for most of them. So most of the guides have support for Maven or Gradle, and Java or Groovy or Kotlin. So there's 6 variants for each guide. Typically, there's a couple that don't have every combination. And as Alok pointed out, at the top of all the guides is a link where you can download the completed application, which we build as part of the build process. And we actually run our continuous integration tests against those. So we're constantly testing the guides to make sure that stuff stays current. So a huge amount of information out there, and we're adding new stuff. We just added 2 this week. I just saw this. If you follow the Micronaut Framework on Twitter, you'll see the announcements for the new guides. There's a new guide on Mqtt, which is a messaging platform that we have support for, and another one I'm forgetting. I'm drawing a blank, but and we've got tons in the pipeline. We're adding more, and this Graal or Graal Cloud Native initiative is the motivation behind a lot of the new guides. So we're creating guides that are shared content, is to the extent possible, across different clouds. So we just did one on connecting to a MySQL database from Azure and AWS and Google and OCI. And next we're going to do security. We're working on one for OpenID Connect, and we've got a really, really long list of guides. So we're sort of shooting for one set of guides for all the different cloud vendors, all the big four, basically every month or so. We're probably not going to be able to maintain that pace, but lots of great information out there in the guides site. So please check that out. And most of the guides, we try to make sure that if there's a free tier in a certain cloud, that we use free tier resources to the extent possible.
Great. Any other questions, comments, feedback for us? All right, we'll wrap it up then.